Ahoy cypherpunks, and welcome back to another episode of building the Open Source Odyssey website. In today's episode, we will add a custom block for PayloadCMS. And we'll use this custom block for our frequently asked questions. Frequently asked questions is a section on almost every website. If you want to learn more about the project, the most common questions are posted there along with a nice answer. And usually there's quite a bunch of questions, and in order for this website or this page not to get too crowded, we want to have it kind of compactable. So what we will do is we will create a block component for this FAQ. So we can expand and collapse our questions and answers. We will have in the end a maintainable new block in the admin panel where we can add all of the different questions and answers, and they will always be rendered the same way through a component that we can style ourselves. A little bit about blocks in PayloadCMS. Payload structures its layout with blocks. In other words, we as developers can add new kinds of blocks, and this could be really anything. The content maintainer or editor can then use these custom blocks and rearrange them and build layouts as they would like. And this gives a lot of creativity and freedom to the content editors. And for us as developer, we only need to implement a new type of block once, and then it's there forever to be used again and again. Let's go over to the payload documentation and check out the documentation for the blocks field. Here I am on the documentation page for the blocks field of PayloadCMS, and let's just read through the first two paragraphs. The blocks field is incredibly powerful, storing an array of objects based on the fields that you define, where each item in the array is a block with its own unique schema. Blocks are a great way to create flexible content model that can be used to build a wide variety of types. And then they go into certain examples for these different block types. I am now on the FAQ page that we created in one of the earlier videos, and let's check out what we currently have as block type fields that we could use. So I'm going to go to add layout here. And these are all of the blocks that we currently have available. So we can have a call to action block, a content block, media block, archive, and form block. We are using quite a bunch of them already. For example, the content is like the most generic content block. If you want to have some rich text that's rendered in a particular way, we'll use the content. For the content tagged form, we have the form block, and so on and so forth. And now we want to create a new kind of block that is an accordion that we can use for our FAQ section. And for this, we will use ShadCNui, or as the dope developers like to call this, shadcn. And if we try this component out, this is working very easily. We can hover over one of these elements, and when we click on it, it expands and shows the answer. And this is exactly what we will use. So we will have the question here, and then the answer can be shown when the user clicks on it. And we can also have it so that either when you click on a new, the old one collapses, or you can kind of open them simultaneously. So what we need to do in the very beginning is install this shadcn component. And I will do this by copying this text here and install it in our project. Unfortunately, this command doesn't work quite for me because I am using Tailwind 4, and it's looking for a Tailwind config that we don't have anymore. And I don't know how to quite resolve this, but we can always add the component manually. So what we'll do for this is we'll tab over to the manual section here and just follow these steps. So first we'll install the Radix UI React accordion. Next, we will copy and paste this code here into our components. So we'll come in here, go to the components, into UI. This is where all of our shadcn components are. Add the accordion TSX and paste in the code that we have just copied. And I think what we also need to adjust here is the import for CN. So let's get rid of this right here and import it again from @utilities_UI. Let's commit these changes that we have done so far. So we installed the accordion. Next, what we want to do is go into the blocks folder in our source. And here we can see all of the other block components that we already have. For example, the call to action, and it has a configuration, which is a payload block configuration. This is where we define which fields will be available for the block. You know, if you want to fill something out, what fields should be there, what fields are required, kind of like a collection configuration, but just for one single block. And we also have a component. This is the React component that will be rendered on the front end whenever this block is used in our layout. So for simplicity, I'm just going to copy the call to action, name it accordion, and let's go in here now and edit this. Let's get rid of the rich text, the link group. Actually, let's get rid of all of the fields. Rename this to accordion. The slug should be accordion. Interface name is going to be accordion block. The plural will be accordions, and the singular will be accordion without the S. Give this a save. All right, so let's think about the fields that we need for this accordion block. And like I showed you in the shadcn mockup, there's basically two parts of any accordion. There is the title that is always displayed, and then there is the content of the accordion. And since it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to just have a title without content or vice versa, let's make both of these required. In other words, you have to have both. Next, we're going to come to the component that we also copied and clean up the call to action block and make it our accordion block. I'm going to get rid of pretty much everything except for the wrapping div with the class name container, because this nicely gives some padding on the left and right side of our screen. Now we have the configuration for our accordion block, and we need to hook it up so it is available in the pages. And for this, I'm going to navigate to the pages configuration, and in the layout field, I need to now import the accordion block and make it available in this array. With this import in place, I can now regenerate the types for my payload application, and it will read the pages collection and insert the accordion there. With the newly generated payload types in our accordion block, we can now import this accordion block type. So this will read our block configuration, and we pass it to the generic in order to make our fields available in the React component that we want to use. Next, I'm going to come to the shadcn documentation again and copy the boilerplate code for the accordion. And we will just insert this into our block component and fill it out so we are using the title and the content. We are almost done now. All we need to do is tell payload that we actually do want to render the React component we just wrote whenever payload encounters this accordion block in a document where we have defined the accordion block in our admin section. So for this, all we need to do is add the accordion block to this render blocks file. So we need to map the slug of our block to the React component. Our accordion block should now be available whenever we add a layout block to the admin. And here we just provide some dummy information, a title and some content. And let's see how that looks on the front end. Amazing. So here is our accordion block from shadcn with our title. We can click on it to expand it, and all of that is working super well. We are now set up to use our accordion block. We have a payload configuration for the block. We have a React component, and of course we can style the React component now however we want, for example, with TailwindCSS. This is great and all, but when playing with this, I noticed that it's a little bit cumbersome. For every question, I would have to add another accordion block to the layout. And I think we can improve this by actually refactoring a little bit and putting our title and content into an array field, let's call it items, and then looping in the accordion block through these items and displaying them one by one. Since I changed the structure of the block configuration, I also need to adapt how the React component receives its properties and how it renders these properties. So instead of receiving title and content directly, I now receive this items array. Let's make it required because an array without items in this case doesn't make any sense. And then loop through these items and render them one by one. So we will refactor just a little bit to make this work. When I now come back to my admin panel, we can see that we have an accordion block with items, and we can add our various title and content blocks inside of this array. To make our array items a little bit more usable for the admin, let's also add a custom row label so that the title of every question in this array will be displayed as the label if the block itself is collapsed. And for that, I'm just going to copy some boilerplate code and adjust it a little bit so that it works for my purposes. Again, in our block config, we can now add the admin property, give it the components key, and inside add our custom row label. And we do that not by importing it directly, but instead referencing it with the file path it would be in the project. And since we referenced a new file, we also need to regenerate the import map for payload to pick it up. So now I'm just going to adjust the boilerplate code for my accordion array row label a little bit to make it work perfectly for me. Coming back to the admin panel, we can now see that the title on each of these collapsibles is actually the title from within. And this is exactly what we just did. So even if everything is collapsed, you can still glance and see which question is asked. At this point, I thought I'm done, and I went to commit all of my changes and deploy to my production server, but it turns out that actually what I wrote is not very usable, because it turns out that if you have a lengthy answer, it's actually quite cumbersome to write it in such a small text field. So after deploying and filling out some dummy questions, I realized that what should be a much better format for the content would be to have a rich text field. And fortunately, our website template from Payload comes already with such a rich text field. So all I had to do is change the field type of the content from text to rich text and adjust the React component to render this rich text. I could then come back to my payload application, remove the previous items that were not working anymore with the rich text field, and provide new answers, where I was completely free to format the answer text in any way I wanted, even insert links, make text bold, headlines, and so on and so forth. After another round of deployment, I could then fill out the actual FAQ questions on my OpenSource-Odyssey.net website. And of course, you can go and visit this website right now if you want. So that's it from today's video. In this video, we learned how we can create custom blocks, for example, to have accordion blocks for our FAQ section. I hope you learned something, and if you did, make sure to leave a like, a subscription, and maybe even a comment for the algorithm below this video. I will catch you in the next one. Onwards, Cypherpunk.